Hello everyone and welcome to the 102 Hours YouTube channel. Tonight we're going to talk about the story of the BTK Killer, the sadistic, bind, torture, kill, murderer and the epic investigation. You step into the hush of a lamplit room, heart stirring as the night air whispers secrets. The faint hum of a ceiling fan spins in slow circles above you, projecting your own shadow along the walls. In this half-lit space, you sense the weight of unspoken horrors pressed into every corner. You probably won't survive this reality check. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see where all you night owls are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The BTK Killer case revolves around Dennis Rader, a seemingly ordinary family man turned monstrous predator, told here in a second-person present narrative style. Are you ready? Let's begin. You trudge along a dusty gravel road just outside Wichita, Kansas, mid-afternoon sun scorching the horizon. The smell of hot asphalt and freshly cut grass pricks at your senses. This is where Dennis Rader spent his earliest years, quiet streets lined with pale clapboard houses, where every neighbor waved as he passed, unaware of the chaos he'd unleashed decades later. Born in 1945, Rader grew up under a strict household governed by routine. You can almost hear the ticking of the kitchen clock in his childhood home, where chores came first and curiosity was disciplined. By the early 1970s, the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit had begun developing criminal profiling techniques, a mainstream historical fact that would later shape investigations into killers like BTK. But in 1950s Wichita, no one was profiling boys who liked geometry and tying knots. Yet, even then, something in him twisted fascination with control into a darker obsession. His father, an Air Force mechanic, drilled rules into young Dennis: be home by 6, don't ask questions, respect authority. The repeated clink of wrenches and the sharp scent of engine oil became the backdrop of his youth. You might think that routine soothes the mind, but in his case, it stoked a hunger for mastery. Every knot he practiced was precision, every test he ran was an experiment. Investigators still question whether his childhood daydreams ever hinted at unreported early crimes. As a teenager, Rader developed a peculiar obsession with restraining. He read library books on survival skills and boating, fascinated by diagrams of rope and cord techniques. One fringe tidbit: rumor says he stashed a murder kit in his church's basement, complete with ropes and cords, waiting for the right moment. You shiver imagining that hidden box, pristine white ropes coiled perfectly, a silent promise of violence. School was small, friends were few. You navigate hallways filled with the hum of chatter and lockers slamming shut, but Dennis walked alone. His classmates remember a polite boy who offered help in math class, yet something in his dark eyes suggested he was always measuring more than equations. He kept journals filled with lists, victim counts, desired control levels, even sketches of binding positions. It reads like a blueprint, clinical, detached. By 16, he joined the Boy Scouts, earning merit badges in knot tying that most teens shrugged off. He practiced at home, tying chairs to bedposts, testing tension until the wood creaked. It was a game of power to him. How long could rope hold under strain? It sounds innocent until you realize those experiments were rehearsal. At dusk, you descend into a memory of a frostbitten winter, when the wind cuts through thin coats. Young Dennis would wander behind the elementary school, whispering shapes of plans to himself. You can almost feel the icy sting on your cheeks as he scribbles in his notebook: bind, torture, kill. The phrase appears late in his writings, like a signature waiting for its debut. Pause and breathe. This is the portrait of innocence gone wrong, a boy molded by order who weaponized his discipline. You can taste the tension, the edges of control fraying. Think back on your own younger days. Did you ever imagine that teenage experiments could become instruments of terror? It forces a reckoning. Sometimes monsters are born not in shadows but under the bright lights of normalcy. When he enrolled at Wichita State University, you picture him stepping onto campus in crisp shirts and dark slacks, notebook tucked under his arm. He lectured peers on youth group duties and took pride in leading Sunday gatherings, the same gatherings where he quietly measured the strength of chairs, plotting loop patterns. You wonder, did any of his classmates sense those covert calculations? It's chilling to realize his everyday conversations about mentorship were underpinned by dark schematics he buried deep within. He landed a job at the county courthouse after graduation, an environment of order he admired. Little did the townsfolk suspect that behind his pressed suit and polite grin, he catalogued every rule he might one day bend. It's in those foothills of adulthood that you glimpse the final pieces clicking into place, a life engineered for calculated cruelty. Now, trace these origins as we follow his first strike in Park City. Brace yourself as we turn the page. You slip into the dusky streets of Park City on a chilly January evening in 1974, the winter air biting at your cheeks as you navigate narrow residential lanes. Streetlights cast lazy halos on frost-tinged lawns, and every breath feels crisp and metallic. Tonight, you bear witness to Dennis Rader's first real descent into darkness, an inaugural act of terror that would send shockwaves through this quiet Kansas town. It's here, in a modest two-story home on 4th Street, that Rader's obsession with control finds its first human canvas. You circle the Otero residence, heart pounding as you recall how Rader meticulously observed his future victims, Joseph and Julie Otero, a kindly elderly couple who opened their doors to neighbors and strangers with unfettered trust. From his vantage point in the shadows, you sense his calculating gaze tracing the layout of their living room, memorizing the location of chairs, windows, even the exact creak of the back staircase. By 1974, the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit had started formalizing criminal profiling techniques, a mainstream historical fact that would later reshape serial murder investigations. But in Park City, law enforcement still relied largely on witness statements and ballistic reports. You crouch behind a snow-dusted hedge, imagining Rader slipping through a side door he'd tested days earlier, his tools concealed in a canvas satchel. He moved like a ghost on winter's breath, ropes coiled neatly, garrote wire tucked inside his coat. Once inside, he bound Joseph and Julie with clinical precision, wrists pinioned behind backs, ankles tethered to heavy furniture. He lingered in the dim glow of a bedside lamp, as though savoring the symphony of helpless whispers that drifted through the room. Those first wounds were surgical rather than savage, part of an unspoken ritual Rader orchestrated to assert dominion. Investigators still question whether he returned later to examine his handiwork, as reports surfaced of footprints near the yard days after the murders. The next morning, Park City awoke to sirens and cluster of patrol cars buzzing beneath drifting snow. Neighbors huddled along sidewalks, exchanging murmurs that dissolved into panic when officers cordoned off the Otero home. You move through the crowd, taking in the glazed stares and hushed prayers. Officers scoured for clues, shoe prints, a dropped glove, smeared fingerprints, but found little beyond dislodged floorboards and a few stray fibers matching the rope. The term serial killer wasn't yet common parlance. It wouldn't be coined until later that decade by FBI profiler Robert Ressler. Yet in this moment, the seeds of systemic terror were sown, leaving the community to grapple with the unknown face of violence. Pause for a breath. You absorb the collective shock of a town stripped of innocence. 2 lives ended in a matter of hours, leaving questions that outnumbered answers. In the days that followed, Rader slipped back into normality, church volunteer, scout leader, dutiful husband, while Park City reeled. A fringe rumor began circulating, whispers that Rader practiced binding on mannequins he borrowed from the church's costume closet, calculating tension thresholds and knot strength. Some claimed he even used choir robes to mask rope fibers, laundering them to remove telltale traces. It sounds almost absurd, but it underlines a chilling truth: his experiments were methodical, rehearsals for worse. Back at the police station, detectives pored over the scant evidence. They interviewed neighbors who reported seeing a dark sedan parked late at night. They traced phone logs and checked previous burglary calls. Yet no solid leads emerged. You can almost feel their frustration, pages of notes yielding no suspect portrait, no motive beyond cruelty. They filed the case under unsolved homicide, unaware that this was only the opening act. Investigators still question whether a stray fingerprint on a kitchen windowsill belonged to the killer, as it was never matched in any database. Without the DNA profiling tools of later decades, that smudge remained a ghost. Today, hobbyists retracing footsteps call it the ultimate cold trail. You pause again. Reflect on the thin line separating order from obliteration, a single man's perverse calculus, executed with everyday household items, dismantling a loving home. 2 lives vanished in the quiet of night, and Park City learned that evil often arrives disguised as normalcy. As you step away from the Otero home, the horizon bleeds pale light, dawn creeping over rooftops that now bear an invisible scar. You sense Rader watching from afar, unseen but omnipresent, absorbing the turmoil he unleashed. His next move would come soon, even more calculated and cruel. Now steel yourself for the next chapter, the 1977 murders that would mark his chilling escalation and redefine the BTK legend. You slip through the yawning darkness of a cold April evening in 1977, the wind whispering warnings through budding elm branches. Beneath a halo of streetlight, you approach a modest split-level home on West Douglas Avenue. Tonight, the BTK Killer's confidence has morphed into swagger, no longer a tentative experimenter, but a predator certain of his power. You cradle a coil of rope against your chest, each loop refined by months of practice. In the 1970s, forensic pathology laboratories began using luminol to reveal hidden blood traces, a mainstream historical fact that would revolutionize crime scene work, though it won't help these victims tonight. You pause at a windowsill, fingertips brushing the cool glass as you peer inside. The house is quiet, save for the hum of a fridge in the kitchen and the distant drip-drip of a leaky faucet. Your pulse quickens as you imagine rehearsing this entry in your mind, each step choreographed in painful detail. Inside, you glide across the carpet with sock-covered feet, every heartbeat echoing in your ears. The first victim, Shirley Vian, lies asleep in the master bedroom. You move with surgical calm, looping the rope into a sliding knot you perfected, one taught in Boy Scout manuals but twisted here into an instrument of fear. You cinch it around her wrists, relishing the taut resistance before it gives way with a whisper. It's intimate, this binding, you almost hesitate to tighten the last turn. A fringe rumor insists you pause to admire the symmetry of the coils, convinced they were as beautiful as any knot on the Scouting Merit Badge showcase. A sudden creak, a floorboard betrays you. You freeze, breath shallow. Outside, a cat scuttles across the lawn. Do you feel that hollow hush before a scream? You wait, seconds stretching into eternity, then slip back into shadow. Across town, a few weeks later, you target Maureen Hedge and Nancy Fox in an eerily similar home. You slide through a basement window you'd mapped weeks before, your satchel now bulky with extra cords and a length of garrote wire. In the basement's half-light, you bind them to chairs, each knot placed with deliberate patience. You whisper to yourself, bind, torture, kill, the vow now etched into your psyche. The pair awakens in terror, but the methods remain clinical, almost sterile. You depart before sunrise, leaving behind a neatly coiled rope on the floor as a signature. Pause here and catch your breath. 2 distinct murders, identical rituals, yet no immediate pattern unites them in law enforcement eyes. The term serial killer was coined by FBI profiler Robert Ressler in the late 70s, describing criminals who commit multiple murders over time with psychological gratification in between. Still, Park City and Wichita police haven't grasped that label, they see isolated homicides. You fold your memories of those nights into a private album, the faint scarlet stain beneath a chair leg, the imprint of your boots in damp soil outside a back door. Investigators still question whether you studied police procedures to anticipate search patterns, given that no footprints lead to your car. That lingering mystery fuels nightmares of evidence slipping through their fingers. In the wake of these attacks, the community unravels. Neighborhood watch signs sprout on lawns like warning flags. Housewives grip telephones tighter, recalling tales of kidnappings beyond Kansas. You can almost taste the tension as bulletin boards fill with photos of the victims, faces frozen in life, then stricken in death. The local newspaper runs articles on home security innovations, window alarms, door jam sensors. Crime documentaries on TV begin highlighting the rise of violent offenders nationwide, a mainstream fact reminding you that the public's fascination with true crime is growing even as your anonymity persists. At a church gathering one Sunday, you study your fellow congregants, wondering which unsuspecting family will be next. A quirky account later surfaces. Attendees recall seeing you scribbling the letters BTK in the margins of a hymn book, as if testing your new persona on blank lines. Some say you used a dip pen from the altar rail, but no one thought to inspect the ink-stained pages until decades later. The investigation grinds forward, but progress is slow. Detectives gather rope fragments, interview neighbors, and compare call logs. Yet without modern DNA analysis, which wouldn't become commonplace until the 80s, the case stalls. You retreat into your day job at the courthouse, filing paperwork by day and replaying every detail of your crimes by night. A brief summary: 2 separate murder nights, meticulous bindings, and a town on edge. Your ritual has evolved, no longer clumsy tests but executed rites. The BTK legend deepens in dark corners of gossip, but to law enforcement, these remain baffling homicides. What drives you to return after months of silence? That next chapter will reveal a chilling shift. You begin to speak to the hunt itself, taunting the very hunters closing in. You enter the dimly lit detective's bullpen, where the smell of stale coffee mingles with the coarse murmur of worn carpet underfoot. On the edge of a cluttered desk, a crisp white envelope lies waiting, its corners sharpened, the edges uncreased. You reach for it, fingertips brushing against faint impressions of the address scrawled in harsh block letters. Inside, you unfold a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, scented faintly of cedar wood polish. This is the first official taunt, the moment BTK steps out from shadows into the brightest glare of law enforcement scrutiny. By the late 1960s and early 70s, criminals like the Zodiac Killer had already pioneered correspondence-based games with police, sending ciphered messages and boastful postcards, so when this letter arrived in March 1974, seasoned investigators recognized a chilling echo of past monsters. They studied the looping script, noting each curve and pressure point, a forensic handwriting analysis staple since the early 20th century. Yet nothing matched any record on file. The killer's brash opener read, "Greetings, dear old Wichitan. Did you enjoy guessing who I am the first time? I will give you a clue, I am the Scourge of Wichita." It was signed simply BTK, birthing the moniker that would carve its way into criminal folklore. You tilt the letter toward the fluorescent light, tracing the glare off a nearly invisible watermark, a stylized crest from a church's letterhead. Fringe chatter later claimed Rader pilfered sermon stationery to compose his letters, laundering the pages until they bore no hint of origin. Whether he sourced the paper from Christ Lutheran Church or another pulpit, the effect was deliberate, each page whispered piety even as its message reeked of perversion. In cold print paragraphs, he outlined his method: "I bind my victims with care. I torture them to delight in their fear. I kill to feel power. Soon I will place a trophy in plain view." The language was clinical, almost bureaucratic, an ominous contrast to the violent deeds it described. You shiver reading how he requested that the letter be passed directly to the homicide unit, demanding acknowledgement of his artistry. "Let me witness your respect." It was both an invitation and a dare. Investigators still question whether the BTK acronym was an afterthought or a fully formed identity from the start. Was Rader experimenting, testing society's reaction to each new twist of the knife, or did he meticulously script his persona before ink ever touched paper? That debate lingers in forensic circles, fueling speculation about the psychological chess match he intended. Over the following weeks, more envelopes appeared, each personalized to different media outlets and police task forces. You imagine mailroom clerks glancing at envelopes stamped BTK, unsure whether to laugh at a crass prank or summon SWAT. In one letter, he included blueprints sketched in shaky pencil, detailing potential entry points of future victims' homes. In another, he enclosed bits of rope, meticulously coiled and sealed in plastic, as proof of his binding prowess. A whispered rumor surfaced that he once sent a jar of petri-cultured swabs grown from a victim's wounds, but that may be nothing more than grisly hearsay. The local paper treated the dispatches as sensational fodder, front-page splashes urging citizens to lock doors and keep children close. TV crews arrived with bright lights and handheld cameras, shining harsh beams into dark driveways. The community felt the glare of publicity as acutely as the killer felt his own. Your pulse quickens picturing neighbors gripping their evening mail, half hoping for news of a breakthrough, half fearing the next headline. Detective Ron Smith, veteran of the Wichita PD, spearheaded the response. He assembled a ragtag BTS, Bind Torture Slay, task force, though the term serial killer was still sparingly used outside FBI memos. Profilers from Quantico flew in, armed with composite sketches based on victim descriptions and letter content, a technique refined after the Zodiac case. They recognized Rader's pattern, his emphasis on control, his morbid need for an audience. Yet none suspected the mild-mannered compliance officer who sat politely at church board meetings. You lean back in a squeaky chair, imagining the hush that fell over that first press conference. Flash bulbs popped as Smith held up the letter beneath a plexiglass shield. "This is our suspect's whisper," he intoned with weary gravitas. The audience leaned forward, breath caught, watching the pen-stroked lines like a map of carnage. That moment marked a turning point. BTK became more than a method, he was a brand. Pause to soak in the theater of it all. You feel the collective tension as city officials scrambled to address public fear. Home security companies reported skyrocketing alarm sales, and self-defense seminars filled local gyms. It was a mainstream historical fact that 1970s America saw a surge in personal protection measures, spurred by high-profile murders and rising urban crime rates. Here in Wichita, that trend had a personal sting. The predator was at large, slipping letters through the mail slot as easily as love notes. Yet beneath the spectacle, investigative progress stagnated. Handwriting samples from church records failed to yield matches. Fingerprints lifted from letter envelopes returned no hits. The garrote wire fragments he provided allowed ballistics experts to confirm their type, but that information only narrowed weapon suppliers, not persons. The task force chased every lead, questioning church staff, former roommates, neighbors of Otero victims, but each route ended in dead ends or polite disclaimers. You consider the irony. Rader's own hubris nearly betrayed him when he once misspelled bind as bind in a public note, hinting at a childhood stutter some acquaintances later recalled. But even that clue slipped away, unconnected until years later. Investigators still question whether he intentionally planted that typo to test their scrutiny or simply suffered a momentary lapse in his meticulous facade. In the hush between press briefings, detectives pored over every BTK communication, mapping dates and postmarks. They noticed patterns. Letters arrived on days following cold fronts, suggesting a comfort in low temperatures. They speculated on his employment. Only someone with flexible hours could slip away at dusk to mail letters. Yet the suspect list remained stubbornly anonymous. You close the file on your desk, the ink smudging at the edges. Each page feels heavy with unanswered questions and unsourced pride. He'd achieved his goal, to be feared, to be noticed, to stand apart. And as you walk out into the chill Kansas evening, you sense the killer somewhere, pen in hand, savoring the dance he'd begun. The letters were more than paper, they were the heartbeat of a monster, echoing through empty halls and rattling locked doors. Breathe in that tension, feel the weight of each unmailed letter, each unanswered taunt. Up next, you'll glimpse the personal worlds of his victims and the ritualistic signatures he left behind, inviting you deeper into the dark. You find yourself in the hushed glow of a crime lab's evidence room, heart racing as rows of plexiglass shelves display the silent relics of Rader's atrocities. Each item, ropes coiled with surgical precision, small plastic bags holding hair strands, handwritten notes, carries a fragment of terror. Tonight, you'll meet the victims whose lives he stole and trace the ritualistic signatures he left behind, confronting the chilling patterns that bound his crimes into a grotesque tapestry. You start with Joseph and Julie Otero, the kindly retired couple whose warmth filled their tidy Park City home. They were bound by the wrists and ankles to chairs he'd chosen for their heavy legs, ensuring they couldn't struggle. You imagine the soft thud of Julie's sandal against the hardwood floor as she tried to rise, only to be yanked back by unyielding rope. This meticulous binding was not random. By the late 1970s, behavioral analysts recognized ritualistic signatures, unique actions beyond mere killing, that spoke to a killer's psyche. Raiders were textbook examples, with knots tied in a Scandinavian hitch that only advanced sailors might master. Investigators still question whether he adopted that knot from naval manuals or designed it himself, but the precision spoke volumes about his need for control. Next, you face Shirley Vian, a vivacious homemaker whose bright laughter once filled her Douglas Avenue kitchen. She was bound similarly, wrists crossing her torso in an almost decorative X, her legs laced tightly to a dining chair. You feel the hush of the room as forensic specialists discovered faint imprints on her wrists, tiny blood blisters where the rope bit into her skin, an intimate mark of suffering he wanted to observe. A fringe rumor suggests he sometimes tested knot tension on mannequins he'd altered, sewing canvas skin over joints to mimic human resistance. It's unclear if these experiments ever left physical evidence, but they hint at his compulsive rehearsals. In the Hedge and Fox case, two young professionals found bound in their shared basement apartment, you sense a dark escalation. He looped the cords around their necks first, just tight enough to leave shallow ligature grooves, a perverse prologue before binding their limbs. That act of pre-binding strangulation marks a ritualistic flourish. Some serial offenders leave tokens or take souvenirs. Rader left wounds as his trophies. Historical studies of serial killers describe such ritual as both message and memento, a grim handshake between killer and crime scene. You feel a shiver imagining those grooves, then see the small plastic evidence bag holding garrote wire fragments, each strand a testament to his signature. A quick summary pause. You've met 3 pairs of victims, each bound with methodical care, each bearing marks of bondage that transcended simple murder. Their stories merge into a pattern, knots, tension points, and silent declarations of dominance. Moving deeper, you confront Cindy Wittes and Shirley Vian's roommate in 1986, killed in the same ritualistic style. Their bindings formed mirror images, limbs crossing at identical angles, ropes coiled around legs in matching loops. You lean in as a forensic artist explains how such symmetry speaks to obsessive compulsions, the crime scene as canvas, each victim a replica of the last. You notice slight variations, the occasional extra twist on a wrist knot, perhaps a signature, to distinguish between kills. Investigators still question whether those tweaks represented premeditated codes, date markers, perhaps, or psychological messages only he understood. At the crime lab's corner, you see a clear evidence tray holding a single victim's earring, found near a bloodstain outside the crime scene. You recall reading that Rader sometimes removed jewelry from his victims as trophies, an uncommon twist for a killer whose main trophies were the bonds themselves. A fringe theory proposes he wore these items later, hidden in a shoebox under his bed, but no such box was ever found. Yet the earring remains a ghostly link to Vanessa McGowan, bound and strangled in 1986, her last moments recorded in police transcripts as an agonized gasp before silence. You drift to the most infamous case, that of Catherine Bright in 1991. You imagine her face frozen in terror as Rader bound her wrists with braided cord, then arranged her legs in a symmetrical pose he described once as looking like a butterfly ready to take flight. That description came in one of his letters, a chilling blend of poetic flourish and clinical detachment. By then, forensic teams were cataloging bindings with photographic standards developed in the 80s, a mainstream fact showing how crime documentation had grown more scientific. Photographs of Bright's bindings show near-perfect mirror symmetry, each loop aligned to the centimeter. Its artistry twisted into horror. Pause and breathe. You've journeyed through 6 victims and seen how his rituals deepened, knots became symbols, bindings evolved into statements. But the darkest detail lies in what he left behind, detailed notes on each victim's height, weight, and even bed linen thread counts, scribbled in neat columns on lined church stationery. Investigators still question whether he planned to leave a full dossier of victims as his ultimate trophy, a catalogue of his perfected crimes, but none were recovered beyond partial scraps. Now you confront the collective profile. The majority of his victims were white adults living alone or in pairs at night, a pattern aligning with comfort zones he'd mapped during daytime surveillance. He avoided couples with children, steered clear of homes with complex alarms or guard dogs, evidence of his calculated risk assessment. You imagine him driving slow, clocking home security signs, reading newspapers for details on alarm companies, a mundane behavior that concealed monstrous intent. As you step back, consider the broader true crime landscape. By the early 90s, media coverage of serial killers had surged, with shows like America's Most Wanted broadcasting composite sketches nationwide. Rader's ritualistic consistency, rope types, not styles, post-mortem positioning, became his unintentional brand, making him a subject of fascination in crime documentaries. That public intrigue, a mainstream historical fact, would later help tip him off. He craved acknowledgement, ensuring his signature patterns were recognized far and wide. Finally, a rhetorical question hovers. Have you ever wondered what it means when a killer treats their crime scene like an art installation? The answer lingers in those knots and coils, an obsession with domination, control, and lasting recognition. You pause before the evidence room door, heart pounding, knowing the next turn in this twisted saga involves the long silence he plunged the community into, a chilling arc you're about to explore. You slip into the long, uneasy hush that stretches from the late 1970s through the dawn of the 80s, a silence so complete it almost feels deafening. After the brutal spree in 1977, BTK vanishes, no letters, no murders, no signatures. You press your ear to the community's collective heartbeat and hear only echoing questions. For a full decade, Wichita and Park City police sift through old files and pursue fleeting leads, but the killer's silence is absolute. By 1985, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VCAP, is established, a mainstream historical fact aimed at linking violent crimes across jurisdictions. But here in Kansas, the BTK case remains tucked in dusty binders, with only occasional footnotes and broader discussions of serial homicide. You picture investigators hunched over flickering fluorescent lights, cross-referencing cold case rosters and hoping that some pattern will emerge. They file reports, update watch lists, but each morning brings no new terror, only fresh frustration. During these years, Rader thrives in obscurity. You watch him at Christ Lutheran Church, greeting parishioners with a warm handshake, distributing bulletins, and volunteering at the food pantry. The Boy Scouts continue to crown him a diligent troop leader. With every smile and sermon, he cements his reputation as a model citizen, a perfect camouflage. Investigators still question whether he orchestrated small-scale pranks or minor assaults during this lull to test police response, but no evidence ever surfaced. It's as if he exhaled, held his breath, then slipped into a different rhythm entirely. No television shows profile BTK's suspicions. True crime documentaries on ABC and NBC focus instead on East Coast cases. You imagine Rader watching from his living room, remote in hand, as America's fascination with criminals like the Son of Sam and the Hillside Stranglers blossoms. He learns from their coverage, noting how investigators reacted to public fear and media pressure. Fringe rumors hint he clipped news articles into scrapbooks, each headline a lesson in notoriety he refuses to recycle for himself. A summary pause, 10 years of normalcy, 10 years of calm, while a man who once lurked in shadows now basks in suburban routine. You feel the tension of unfulfilled dread, the knowledge that he's out there, yet silent. As the 80s progress, forensic science advances, blood typing refines, fingerprint databases digitize, investigative techniques sharpen. Yet the BTK file gathers dust, like an unopened gift. Detectives shuffle old letters, glance at knot diagrams, then file them away. They post wanted flyers on downtown bulletin boards, but most locals have never heard the name BTK. It's almost as if the case never existed. Rader's suburban bliss deepens. You picture him coaching little league games, swapping recipes at church bake sales, and clicking away at his county courthouse typewriter. He files monthly reports, attends PDA meetings, and files his paperwork with military-like precision. No one suspects that the geometry teacher next door once stapled victims' limbs to chairs. It's a textbook example of how serial offenders can evaporate into plain sight. Investigators still question whether unconfirmed deaths during this period, cases with unclear bindings or unexplained ligature marks, might be his work. In Hutchinson, Kansas, a young woman found bound but alive in 1982 raises eyebrows. Similar knots appear, but she survives to tell a tale of a masked intruder. That victim's story flickers in police logs, then dies out when insufficient evidence ties her attacker to BTK. You wonder, were these false starts, or experiments to rekindle the old thrill? You breathe in the weight of unanswered years. The town changes around you, shopping malls replace farmland, cell phones emerge, and cable TV brings 24-hour news cycles. The 80s obsession with serial killers grows. Thomas Harris publishes Red Dragon in 1981, planting seeds for Hannibal Lecter mania. True crime magazines tout America's most notorious killers, yet BTK remains a footnote, a ghost in collectors' issues. You can almost see Rader scanning those pages, circling familiar tactics and mentally filing them under potential upgrades. Another pause, reflect on the irony. Technologies designed to catch killers evolved precisely when he withdraws, slipping through cracks that would later snap shut. His absence becomes a presence, a static hum of dread that seeps into every unsolved homicide file. You feel the weight of a void, where every tick of the clock mocks investigators' hopes. At home, Rader's own family life flourishes. He attends parent-teacher conferences, celebrates anniversaries, and bakes birthday cakes that fill the house with cinnamon and sugar. Friends recall his pride in his children's achievements, his laugh at backyard barbecues, his reliable pattern of normal. Yet beneath every pat on the back lies a man who mastered the art of concealment. Fringe whispers say he once used his church's storage room to stash more ropes, untouched, clean, waiting for their next call. No one ever thought to check. By 1990, detective forums and academic journals reflect on the missing decade in BTK's timeline. Case studies raise theories: mental burnout, relocation attempts, or secret incarceration for minor infractions. But each hypothesis fizzles without proof. A mainstream criminology conference in 1988 noted BTK's case among cold cases to watch, underscoring how little new information emerged over time. Those presentations draw sleepy nods from colleagues more intrigued by fresh killings elsewhere. You press your palm against the community's pulse once more. The silence has grown almost comfortable, like an old sweater, soft around the edges, but concealing sharp hidden shards. You wonder, does true danger rest in what you see, or what you never suspect? This lull, unsettling as it is, sets the stage for a shock so profound that when the killer finally re-emerges, the world will barely recall his name. The calm before the storm hisses with anticipation, offering no warning except the empty pages in a detective's notebook. Now, steel yourself for the 1991 resurrection, a return not just to murder, but to heightened cruelty and taunts renewed. You slip into the hush of an early 1991 winter evening, where Wichita lies draped in a sheath of frost under the ghostly glow of street lamps. It is January 15th, and a thin crust of snow crunches beneath your boots as you approach the bright household on South George Washington Boulevard. Through the diamond-paned window, you see a living room bathed in soft amber, with a tidy collage of family photos and a ticking clock. Inside, Catherine Bright, a devoted elementary schoolteacher, pores over lesson plans at her oak desk, her well-worn satchel slung over a chair and a child's crayon drawing taped above her typewriter. A half-empty mug of chamomile tea rests beside a stack of graded papers, its gentle vanilla scent drifting through the air. Unseen, BTK's gloved hand tests the window latch, his careful breath fogging the glass. When the latch clicks open, your pulse ratchets up, a jagged spike of fear slicing through the calm. Do you feel the weight of dread settling over you like an iron shroud? On the frigid night of February 9th, you wander along Maplewood Drive beneath skeletal maple branches. The ranch-style home of Julie Fox Hayes stands in muted silence, its porch light casting hesitant shadows across cracked paint and frost-etched windows. Through the glass you glimpse Julie hunched over her sewing machine, vibrant fabric spilling across her lap and a sewing kit poised at her side. A faded photograph of her late grandmother perches on a nearby end table, and a gray house cat curls at her feet, its gentle purr a soft soundtrack to domestic calm. A late model clock ticks steadily on the wall, the rhythm muffled by swatches of cloth and humming needles. You sense BTK's shadow drift across the pane before he parts the curtain, slipping inside like a phantom. In one fluid motion, he winds yellow nylon cord around her wrists, each twist executed with clinical precision. The warmth of her home turns to ice as the cord tightens, stealing her breath and her world in the same instant. What raw panic must have surged through her veins? Pause and breathe. Two innocent women, separated by weeks yet bound by the same unseen terror, now trapped in the cold clutch of night. Their sudden deaths shatter the decade-long silence like fragile glass underfoot. News helicopters descend, their rotors carving the air into ragged rhythms. Television screens flood with breaking bulletins, bold red letters declaring BTK strikes again. Neighbors press trembling hands to frosted windows, voices hushed beneath the wail of sirens. Business owners lock shop doors and retreat behind heavy shutters. This collective dread weaves itself into every hushed conversation. By spring of 1991, America's Most Wanted had aired over 300 episodes and became a linchpin of primetime crime television. Viewers scanned grainy composite sketches and dialed hotline numbers in droves, desperate to play detective from their living rooms. Investigators still question whether BTK weaponized this media frenzy, timing his return to coincide with peak viewership and a frenzy of headlines. His decade of silence looks less like absence now and more like a deliberate intermission, a dark pause before a grand, brutal reprise. Meanwhile, forensic science teetered on the brink of revolution. DNA profiling had already secured landmark convictions on both sides of the Atlantic, and the FBI's fledgling Cody's database promised to link crimes across state lines. Yet BTK's clinical precision eluded every breakthrough. No loose fibers, no stray hairs, no drop of blood escaped his meticulously staged tableaus. The very systems designed to trap him remained blind beneath his calculating cruelty. You sense his artistry sharpening. Gone are the simple scout-taught knots of his early crimes. Now victims lie arranged in contorted tableaus, limbs braided into patterns that resemble grotesque sculptures. He drapes crisp white sheets across chairs, framing each body like a centerpiece in a macabre gallery. You envision BTK stepping back under the flicker of dawn's first light, flashlight in hand, inspecting every coil until the geometry of suffering is flawless. Does the thought of your own body displayed in such precise torment send a shiver down your spine? A fringe rumor coils through true crime circles that at Catherine Bright's scene, BTK slid an old Bible open to Psalm 37 and penciled his initials beside the verse "Fret not thyself because of evildoers." Volunteers at Christ Lutheran Church later discovered faint graphite smudges on donated hymnals, marks uncannily similar to handwriting samples from his taunting letters. Skeptics dismiss it as morbid folklore, but to you it stains the narrative with sacrilege, melding faith and fear into one unholy signature. You press your palm against a frost-kissed windowpane outside the Hayes residence, icy glass searing through your glove. A distant siren wails, and radio static crackles like broken whispers in the night. Why resurface after a decade of hushed anticipation? You sense BTK's hunger sharpened by silence, his restraint honed into a blade of dread. The winter stillness hums with unsung screams, a silent promise that the worst is yet to come. As headlights carve twin beams across drifting snow, you step away from Maplewood Drive, heart drumming a frantic rhythm in your chest. Church bells toll a vigil for lost souls, PDA meetings cancel in solemn respect, and shopkeepers board up windows against imagined threats. Neighbors exchange anxious glances, volunteers distribute blankets to stranded motorists, and community centers throw open doors for shelter. Telephone banks buzz non-stop as worried families relay tips through crackling lines. In kitchens and living rooms, circles gather in candlelit vigils, each flame a fragile stand against encroaching darkness. Now replay these scenes in your mind: the snap of cord on skin, the flicker of a lamp eclipsed by shadow, the hush erupting into panic. Keep your senses keen. The next chapter will unravel mounting investigative frustration, the first glimmers of digital forensics tracing metadata from letters and phone logs, and the tightening noose around a killer who believed himself both ghost and god. Are you ready to follow that next thread into even darker depths? You enter the cramped, fluorescent-lit war room of the Wichita Police Department, where white boards groan under scrawled timelines, flowcharts, and suspects' names. The hum of overhead fans fails to mask the low murmur of detectives debating every tint of ink on BTK's letters. Flashbulbs from media crews spike the tension, every journalist clamoring for a quotable sound bite while officers scramble to placate public outrage. It's late 1991, and the weight of expectation presses on you like a lead blanket. By this point, the FBI's National Crime Information Center, NCIC, has been operational for over 2 decades, providing computerized criminal records to thousands of agencies nationally, a mainstream historical fact that promised to revolutionize investigations. Yet here, the BTK file remains stubbornly analog: yellowed manila folders, typewritten reports, and dozens of unreviewed witness statements stacked in teetering piles. You sense the collective frustration. Local detectives bristle as federal agents arrive with crisp laptops and acronyms, insisting on protocol. You feel the sting of interdepartmental friction, the silent question hanging in the air: who's really in charge? Detective Ron Smith paces beneath a bulletin board plastered with composite sketches drawn by different artists, each one subtly different, each promising a breakthrough yet delivering none. You watch as he runs chalk along fingerprint lifts taken from the 1977 crime scenes, only to shake his head at the smudged ridges. The advent of automated fingerprint identification systems had begun in larger cities by the late 80s, but in Wichita County, the technology trickled in slowly. You lean in close and almost feel the officer's resentment. They possess leads but lack the tools, caught between old-school legwork and promised modernity. Investigators still question whether too many cooks spoiled the broth when Kansas Bureau of Investigation agents and FBI profilers clashed over strategy. One faction wanted to mine BTK's letters for psychological clues, while another pressed for more traditional surveillance of known suspects. You can almost taste the tension as the two groups volley suggestions back and forth: wiretap the church parking lot, run polygraphs on former Boy Scout leaders, recheck the motion-activated cameras gifted to neighborhoods after the '77 spree. Each proposal feels like a lifeline tossed across a stormy sea, but none stick. Outside the precinct, the community's fear takes on a life of its own. Home Security Unlimited, a local alarm company, reports a 40% surge in window sensor installations overnight. Tins of BTK survival kits appear on basement shelves: flashlights, whistles, printed lists of safety tips. A fringe rumor swirls that someone once mailed a bag of salt to the police with a note reading, "BTK hates salt," must be a nod to his salted peanuts at church socials. It's absurd, but you catch yourself wondering if there's a grain of truth in every joke. At the weekly press briefings, Deputy Chief Hernandez reads prepared statements with a weary smile: "We are working tirelessly. We have no further details to share." Flash bulbs pop, and the gaggle of reporters scribble furiously. You watch Smith roll his shoulders and glance at the door, where news vans line the parking lot like vultures waiting for fresh carcasses of information. The strain is visible, morale tanks with each passing week that yields no new evidence. You slip into the back hallway to find Agent Thompson from Quantico poring over the latest BTK letter, eyes narrowed. It arrived just 3 nights ago, typed, pristine, bearing a new flourish under the signature, a tiny handprint drawn in blue ink. Thompson traces it with a gloved finger. You shiver imagining what that handprint means. Investigators still question whether the loop was real or a clever forgery meant to divert forensic analysis. The debate has splintered focus, dividing efforts between extracting latent prints and decoding potential cryptograms embedded in the letterhead. Meanwhile, tips flood the tip line, some serious, many absurd. You listen to a voicemail reporting a man in a trench coat sneaking around Christ Lutheran's grave markers at midnight. You read a handwritten note alleging BTK is actually a duo working in tandem. Each call demands follow-up, phone trees, detective reassignments, crime scene reenactments. Your head spins under the weight of paperwork alone, Form 27B, chain of custody sheets, media clearance memos. It feels like trying to empty a bathtub with a teaspoon. A summary pause, police resources strained, investigations splintered by competing theories, and the community's terror amplified by every unconfirmed tip. Yet the killer remains free, watching every misstep. In the break room, you find Sergeant Martinez clutching the city's only handheld breathalyzer, lamenting how modern tools reach only so far when faced with a cunning mind. She flips through an old notebook filled with suspect profiles and scribbles beside one name, Dennis Rader. Could be too obvious. You sense her frustration, footwork and elbow grease only go so far without digital breadcrumbs. In larger jurisdictions, geographic profiling had begun offering insights by mapping murders against a suspect's likely residence. Here, that science is whispered about but never fully embraced. Rewind to early October, when investigators tested unmarked police cars around neighborhoods matching letter postmarks. Traffic cameras snapped grainy images, but no one expected high-definition clarity. All they got were silhouettes in overcoats and scarves, shadows indistinguishable from any other winter passerby. The camera dragnet strategy felt promising but ultimately yielded nothing tangible. You can still feel the hollow thud in everyone's chest when those hours of surveillance returned no arrest. Late at night, exhausted detectives reassemble in the bullpen for a ritual known as the shitty sandwich meeting, where every idea must pass under brutal peer critique. One junior detective suggests resurrecting old bicycle logs from 1974 for any mention of odd riders near crime scenes, another pushes to canvass local auto parts stores for tire tread matches. A chorus of been there and failed that greets every pitch. You feel the collective ache, seasoned pros haunted by misfires, junior cops drowning in second-guessing. The killer's silence is a roar echoing around them. And still, the letters come. Malone's Gazette prints them verbatim, fueling copycat correspondence nationwide. By 1992, at least 3 hoaxers claimed the BTK mantle, ranging from bored teenagers to pranksters seeking attention. Sorting hoaxes from the real thing further splinters the force. You can almost taste the bile in the air as detectives toss letters into real and fake piles, only to re-examine every envelope when nothing suits. You pause again. Have you ever watched a predator elude capture not through brilliance, but through your own indecision, by dividing your strengths against each other? That pain and powerlessness seeps into the precinct's walls. As holiday decorations appear in shop windows, you glimpse faces in the crowd, tight smiles, darting eyes, every sense tuned for the next clue. The BTK case becomes folklore born of fear, bedtime stories for children admonishing, stay inside or BTK might take you. You feel the absurdity, the raw dread, and the mounting guilt of an unseen foe thriving on your failures. Across town, volunteers and amateur sleuths form watchdog groups, trading BTK conspiracies at church basements and coffee shops. They draft their own flyers, reprint the old letters, and even publish underground newsletters. Their zeal borders on obsession, blending hope with hysteria. Yet none catch him. You lean against the squad car rack as dawn breaks, the city's hum restarting below. The war room falls silent but for the steady drip of a leaking faucet, each drop a reminder that time marches on. And with each tick, your frustration solidifies into resolve. You will not let this case fade into another cold file. Next, you'll dive into the false lead spawned by a 1993 letter, red herrings that nearly derailed the hunt and left investigators questioning every move. Are you ready to pursue those shadows? You sink into the cracked leather stool behind the evidence counter as a battered manila envelope thuds onto the desk in December 1993. The fluorescent bulbs overhead hum, casting a flat glare over your uniform, and your fingers tremble as you slit the flap with a dull blade. Inside lies a single sheet of yellowed paper, fancy looped handwriting spelling out an astonishing confession. BTK claims credit for a 1982 assault in Hutchinson, complete with grisly details of ligature points and a mysterious missing locket. You feel your pulse quicken. Could the killer have resurfaced again after 2 long years of true silence? By the early 1990s, many U.S. police departments had begun integrating computerized databases like NCIC into their workflows, allowing cross-referencing of crime scenes across county lines for the first time. Yet here you are holding what might be the most tantalizing link you've seen in years, and your terminal lacks the memory to trace these fresh clues. You wonder, if only you could plug this letter directly into the system, maybe BTK's shadow would flicker into view. Your squad scrambles. Detectives swarm the bulletin board, tacking up photocopies of the letter alongside old BTK files. The fidelity of the writing sends chills. You recognize the precise flourish on the capital B, reminiscent of earlier letters taunting Wichita's tabloids. Still, you pause. Investigators still question whether the 1993 correspondence was penned by Rader himself or by a clever imitator writing the BTK legend for infamy. That uncertainty hangs over you like stale cigarette smoke. A summary pause, an unsolicited letter arrives, claiming a resurrected BTK crime from over a decade ago, and the investigation jolts back to life amid skepticism and hope. You walk the quiet corridors of the county jail, gathering all notes on the 1982 Hutchinson case, an admittedly under-investigated break-in where a lone woman survived, bound but left alive in a frightful tableau. You picture the cord scars on her wrists, the overturned dresser she clawed against, the single earring missing from her lobe. Now, this new letter describes every detail with unnerving precision. I left her standing, frozen, as a trophy in her own living room, it boasts. Could BTK truly have played God with a survivor, then vanished without a word? You glance at your partner, shrugging as you flip through microfiche printouts of old witness statements. No one at the time suspected a serial predator, they chalked the event up to an opportunistic prowler. Yet the letter's mention of Venetian blind cord, a BTK trademark, feels like the ghost of old crimes creeping across your desk. Do you trust your gut and chase this phantom lead, or write it off as another hoax? You let out a long breath, tasting stale fear on your tongue. Fringe whispers course down precinct hallways. One detective swears the letter arrived sealed with a speck of blood that tested negative for human origin, while an amateur sleuth claims the envelope was washed in church basin water, an eerie nod to Rader's devout congregation. These rumors swirl like dust motes in a slanted afternoon beam, drawing you deeper into questions about motive and timing. You convene the task force in the cramped briefing room, fluorescent glow bouncing off whiteboards scrawled with timelines. Someone fetches a single coffee pot and a dozen styrofoam cups. You watch your colleagues sip in silence, eyes darting between the letter and the classified file. Fingers drum on laminated case summaries. Outside, the wind beats the windows like a persistent knock. Investigators still question whether chasing this 1993 letter has caused precious focus on genuine cold leads. Had you pursued the Otero fibers in 1977 more vigorously, or cross-checked that stray fingerprint from 1974 with updated AFIS records, maybe Rader would have been unmasked before now. These doubts worm their way into every conversation, muddying the waters of your resolution. Pause and breathe. The room swirls with competing theories, truth buried under layers of rumor and red herrings. You decide to test the letter's origins. A forensic technician dusts it for prints while another team runs the ink through a chemical assay. The initial results are inconclusive, no latent prints, and the ink matches a common fountain pen variety sold at office supply stores statewide. So the trail goes cold again. Meanwhile, the lead detective assigns 2 officers to travel to Hutchinson, interview the surviving victim, and retrace her memory of that night, hoping to spot inconsistencies or newfound details. Back at headquarters, you sit alone, leafing through stacks of old BTK letters. Under the dim lamp, the 1993 sheet seems almost translucent against earlier taunts. You trace a line, the misspelling of behavior with an extra U, the slight backlog of comma usage, tiny idiosyncrasies that once guided your profiling sketches. Here, They're present but muted, like an echo of a voice you've strained to hear. You shiver, wondering if the killer is testing your nerve, gauging whether you believe in the legend enough to chase shadows. A rogue analyst slides a USB drive across the table, one of the first experiments in digital archiving at your agency. "Plug it in," he says. You hesitate. The drive contains scans of blueprints and biographical sketches often linked to Rader's communications. Rumor has it he kept a My Thoughts text file on his office computer in 1993, waiting for the networked world to catch up. But your computer refuses to recognize the ancient drive, freezing on a blinking cursor, as if determined to guard its secrets. Frustration and fascination surge in equal measure. Another short recapitulation, your task force grapples with a mysterious letter that could be gold or fool's gold, testing the limits of both analog grit and nascent digital forensics. You shift tactics. An undercover officer poses as a reporter, writing articles promising details of the Hutchinson case, bait to lure out the hoaxer or the real BTK. Newsstands publish tantalizing headlines, "BTK returns. Killer's cold case letter shocks Kansas." Callers flood the tip line, offering names, addresses, even confidences from late-night phone calls. But every thread unravels. Suspects interviewed have airtight alibis, background checks turn up no matches, and even the survivor expresses confusion, insisting she never received any communication until now. Investigators still question whether this media ploy inadvertently handed opportunists a platform to muddy the waters further. By broadcasting the letter, had you invited more impersonators to the stage? Each new false confession eats precious days, draining the force's resolve and resources. You stand in the precinct lobby as a young mother clutches a dog-eared flyer with the letter's excerpts. "Please help," she whispers. You lock eyes with her, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like concrete in your chest. For every genuine lead, dozens more prove baseless, and every wasted hour risks the safety of someone else. By March 1994, the Hutchinson follow-up yields only frustration. The survivor recalls details inconsistent with the letter, and no physical evidence corroborates the new claims. The task force shelves the 1993 letter as a likely hoax, filing it under false leads with a thin notation. The station's database logs the entry with a sense of finality, though you notice the file size lingering on the server, a digital ghost. Pause. The 1993 letter is deemed a red herring, its promise extinguished, but its toll remains in shaken nerves and diverted attention. You retreat to your office, rifling through case files one last time before closing them in battered binders. Dust motes drift in the lamplight as you catch glimpses of earlier forms, not diagrams, call logs, priest schedules. Each record is a snapshot of BTK's pattern, preserved in pale ink and fading memory. You realize that while the 1993 letter led nowhere, it reaffirmed one truth: the BTK case thrives on uncertainty and misdirection as much as on evidence and fact. As you flip off the desk lamp, the precinct falls into near silence. You pause in the doorway, hand resting on the cool metal of the doorknob, and ask yourself a final question: will the next whisper in the dark prove genuine, or will it simply echo the unanswered tragedies left behind? Only time will tell. You sink into the dim glow of the county crime lab, where rows of microscopes and centrifuges hum like a chorus of mechanized whispers. It's late 1994, and a revolution is unfolding beneath your fingertips, one that promises to turn cold cases hot again. You hover over a tray of plastic tubes, each labeled with a handful of yellowed carpet fibers or a droplet of dried blood scraped from an old rope segment. These fragments, once inert relics, are about to reveal secrets no witness ever could. By 1987, Sir Alec Jeffreys had developed DNA fingerprinting, a mainstream historical fact that redefined forensic science and ushered in an era where genetic material could link a suspect to a crime scene with unprecedented certainty. Here in Wichita, lab technicians clutched those early breakthroughs like lifelines, coaxing minute genetic codes from decades-old samples. You feel the thrum of anticipation as they load a sample into the PCR machine, its chambers glowing like a tiny sunrise of possibility. You lean forward, catching the faint scent of reagents, a mixture of plastic and chemical promise. Across the room, a forensic biologist scrolls through banding patterns on a gel photo, comparing lanes that represent victims, suspects, and controls. When the bands line up, sharp, identical, you almost gasp at the clarity. It's as if the past is speaking directly through these glowing stripes of light. Does your heart skip a beat imagining the moment when that pattern finally matches a name? Pause and breathe. A once-forgotten fiber could now indict a man who slipped through every conventional net. Investigators still question whether contamination risks from early PCR protocols might have skewed results in other high-profile cases, but here, they follow rigorous controls, negative samples, repeat runs, blind testing. Your pulse steadies as you watch technicians wipe down benches with bleach, swap gloves between each sample, and label every tube thrice. The lab is a cathedral of precision, and every ritual matters. Meanwhile, in Quantico, the FBI rolls out its combined DNA index system, CODIS, in 1990, a national database linking DNA profiles from crime scenes and convicted offenders. Those smaller jurisdictions like Wichita took years to plug in. By 1992 they begin uploading profiles. You picture the glow of a terminal screen flickering to life, directories scrolling under the cursor, Otero rope fiber, VN blood spot, Hayes swab number 3. Each entry feels like a bookmark in a long, unresolved story. It's a mainstream pivot point. Suddenly, the case that stalled for years is jolted back to attention. In the lab's corner, you spot a rumor-fueled oddity, a small vial marked mysterious fluid #B. Whisperers claim Rader once sent police a container of an unknown liquid, supposedly tears collected from his victims, just to spook them. That fringe tidbit, though never substantiated, fuels late-night debates. Was it a prank by a copycat or a twisted psychological ploy? You feel a shiver imagining forensic chemists running toxicology screens on something so macabre. Across the hallway, detectives triangulate old BTK letters with emerging DNA leads. They cross-reference postmark dates against Cody's hits and court records, hunting for any overlap with registered offenders. You sense the thrill of connections flickering into clarity as one investigator exclaims, "We've got a match." But then the room hushes. A profile from the Otero scene matches a profile in the parole board files, yet that inmate has an airtight alibi. It's a humbling reminder that data never lies, but interpretation can mislead. A quick summary pause. DNA testing and Cody's breathe new life into dusty evidence, yet each match demands careful vetting to avoid false trails. You slip into a small conference room where profiles hang pinned like butterflies in a display case. A highway map of Kansas is plastered with color-coded pushpins, green for confirmed BTK crimes, yellow for suspected cases, red for other unsolved homicides with rope-related bindings. You trace a line connecting Wichita to Park City, then to Hutchinson, wondering if the killer ever paused to admire the geographic symmetry of his own terror. Investigators still question whether other unsolved rope homicides in Nebraska or Missouri might bear his signature, but the evidence remains tantalizingly inconclusive. Your eye catches a tentative lead, a fiber from a 1979 burglary in Topeka that shares the same synthetic weave as BTK's rope, a possible experiment he conducted when testing police response. That fiber sat in a local locker for years, its significance buried until DNA tech made fiber analysis more credible. You lean in as an analyst describes how they use polarized light microscopy to compare fiber cross-sections, a mainstream forensic art refined in the late 80s. The image on screen shows triangular filament shapes that align perfectly with rope samples from multiple crime scenes. You inhale sharply at the precision. Then, a thorn of doubt pricks your mind. Could multiple suppliers have sold identical rope, manufacturing countless lengths with the same weave? The lab lead shrugs. It's strong evidence, but not conclusive on its own. You feel the uneasy tension between hope and caution. In the next cubicle, a detective pores over phone records. They overlay call logs from 1974, 1977, and 1991 with letters postmarked dates, seeking recurring patterns, calls to church offices, pages to local businesses, or even library references. Then, a curious note, every letter arrival coincided with a lull in his weekly family home evening meetings at the church. Could that schedule have given him windows to commit murders and mail letters? You sense the gears turning as they reconstruct his monthly calendar, marking potential windows of opportunity. Rhetorical question: have you ever felt the thrill of 1,000 tiny clues snapping into place, only to see them scatter like ashes in a breeze? By mid-1995, the Wichita lab runs a comprehensive retest of all available DNA evidence. Analysts employ short tandem repeat, STR, testing, an advance over older RFLP methods, that requires smaller samples and offers more discriminating power. It's a mainstream break. Suddenly, even trace skin cells lifted from rope knots become viable evidence. You watch with bated breath as technicians prepare capillary electrophoresis runs, the data streaming into electrified peaks and valleys that represent genetic loci. When the report arrives, you clutch the edges of the summary sheet. One profile, culled from a tiny skin cell on a piece of cord, matches a profile in the police database labeled Dennis Rader. It's an almost cinematic moment. The cold, sterile lab air crackles with kinetic energy as everyone realizes the veil has lifted. You sense a collective exhale, as if years of shadow work have distilled into a single, crystalline truth. Pause here. The lingering quiet hums with renewed purpose. Science has tipped the scales. Yet even then, caution reigns. Prosecutors vet the lab procedures, defense experts pore over chain of custody logs, and Rader's attorneys prepare to challenge every step. Investigators still question whether lab protocol changes over time could be grounds for appeal, but the overwhelming weight of genetic evidence seems unassailable. You step outside the lab into the fading dusk, the air smelling of rain on hot pavement. Sirens wail in the distance, reminders that justice is a race against time. The city's lights shimmer on the horizon, each window a reminder of lives forever altered by BTK's cruelty. You feel the electric charge of possibility. The hunt is no longer bound by the limitations of the past, but propelled by the power of science. As you walk back to your car, you replay those laboratory moments in your mind, the click of centrifuge rotors, the glow of gel lanes, the triumphant shouts when a profile emerged. DNA has become the ultimate witness, bearing silent testimony no human voice could deny. And yet, even with that breakthrough, questions remain. What drove Rader for 2 decades, and how many more secrets lie buried beneath old envelopes and faded ropes? Steady your breath. Up next is the pivotal 2004 communication that reignited his taunts and set the final chase in motion. You slip into the low-lit conference room at News Channel 12, the carpet damp with the afternoon air conditioning's drip-drip echo. The whir of a solitary desktop computer fills the hush, its screen aglow with lines of code and a flashed Word document crudely labeled BTK Confession. It's August 2004, and you bear witness to a shift so profound, it will shatter every assumption you ever held about the killer's confidence, and his carelessness. Your pulse quickens as you watch the station's technical director load a dusty 3.5-inch floppy disk into the ancient drive. The disk arrived in an unmarked manila envelope alongside a taunting letter, typed on a parish church's stationery, no return address, signed simply BTK. The scent of printer toner and musty paper mingles in the stale air. You lean forward as forensic specialists extract document metadata, author name Dennis, organization Christ Lutheran Church, and last saved timestamp matching a Sunday evening service. It's the first time digital forensics has directly unmasked a serial killer's identity, a mainstream historical fact that would rewrite investigation playbooks nationwide. Pause and breathe. A single keystroke on an obsolete computer has just pulled an invisible thread connecting every strand of evidence back to one man. Investigators still question whether BTK intentionally embedded that metadata as a final, arrogant flourish, or whether he simply underestimated the reach of modern technology. That uncertainty clings to every breath in the room, making you wonder what his true motive was: control, recognition, or a fatal oversight. In the next moment, the lead detective's voice cracks through the quiet, "We've got our guy." You feel the hairs on your neck stand at attention. Each pixel on the screen crystallizes into the face of a man you've chased in your nightmares. The thrill of victory tangles with a tinge of guilt. You almost admired his cunning, almost respected the precision of his bindings, until that floppy disk betrayed him. A quick summary pause. He mailed a floppy disk, metadata named Dennis Rader, digital forensics closed the net. Outside the makeshift lab, you sense the community's collective exhale. News vans pivot into position, their satellite dishes tilting skyward like mechanical vultures. Reporters jostle for live shots, camera lights flick across the brick facade of the church where Rader still volunteers. You shiver imagining the stunned faces of parishioners, their friend, their scout leader, now unmasked by the very tools he never imagined investigators would wield. You wander the clipped hedges of Christ Lutheran's front lawn at sunset, the air thick with cicadas' hum and lawnmower exhaust. The church's stained glass windows glow amber as dusk falls. Inside, members murmur prayers and stare at bulletin boards plastered with the day's headlines. You smell the faint trace of candle wax and hymnals, now tainted by betrayal. A rumor balloons in hushed corners. Some swear they heard Rader whispering psalms in code, embedding cryptic references in his notes. Fringe tidbit: one parishioner claims he once scrawled the letters BTK in the margins of his sermon transcripts, then quietly erased them before anyone noticed. It seems unbelievable, until you peer at the sermon archive and spot faint graphite smudges. Investigators still question whether those erased scribbles were intentional breadcrumbs for future investigators or mere doodles of a restless mind. The ambiguity chills you more than any rope or lock ever could. Back at headquarters, you join the roundtable debrief. A large map dominated by colored pushpins now glows with new detail, 2004's postmark pin at the top, linking back to a small envelope whose stamp bears the same zip code as the church's P.O. box. You trace the line with your fingertip, following decades of terror across county lines. Profiles hang on the wall, photos of victims, mugshots of suspects, crime scene sketches, all now focused on one simple dossier labeled Rader, Dennis. You feel the weight of reality settling. This is no longer a theory, no longer a possibility. It's fact. A rhetorical question flickers: does the thrill of breaking a case ever measure up to the horror of confessing it to the world? That night, under buzzing fluorescence, detectives pore over Rader's personnel files from the courthouse where he worked. His tenure as compliance officer emerges in stark relief against his criminal record: clean, unremarkable, perfect camouflage. You read memos praising his punctuality, his devotion to procedure, his unflappable demeanor. In one memo, he's lauded for an excellent safety protocol update, and you almost laugh at the irony, imagining him drafting policies by day while drafting terror by night. Pause for a breath. A Boy Scout leader, a church council president, a loving father, simultaneously a remorseless killer. The contrasts carve grooves into your mind. In the early hours, a forensic accountant runs Rader's digital footprint: cell phone logs, library computer sign-ins, postage receipts. You watch as call records align with letter drop dates, calls made from payphones near his home, internet timestamps from library terminals he frequented. A satellite image from a gas station camera shows a figure in a green windbreaker dropping that fateful letter. Each data point weaves a web so tight it seems impossible to escape. Investigators still question whether any piece of technology Rader used was ever that secure, but the consensus is clear: he underestimated the power of metadata. By dawn, arrest warrants are drafted. You step outside into a Kansas morning heavy with humidity and anticipation. The sun breaks through low clouds as patrol cars line up outside Rader's suburban ranch house. You smell gasoline, overhear the static of police radios, and taste the tension of every bullet point in the warrant. Do you feel your breath hitch as the SWAT team sweeps the perimeter? The air vibrates with the promise of closure, but you also sense the fragility of justice served after 30 years of suffering. Moments later, police lights flood the front porch where Rader stands in church slacks and a collared shirt, hands raised. His face is calm, almost serene. You watch as officers cuff him, reading him his rights. The world stage collapses into this precise instant, the silent killer's final act, captured in handcuffs. As you walk away from the arrest scene, the city yawns awake around you, coffee shops open their doors, baseball games begin at nearby parks, children chatter on school buses. Life goes on. The disc's secret is out, but the wounds linger. You close your eyes and take a steadying breath, tasting the morning air. The pivotal communication has done its work. Yet one question lingers: with the man in custody, will the echoes of BTK finally fall silent, or will the shadows he cast continue haunting every corner of Wichita? The next chapter will explore courtroom confessions and the chilling revelations of his motives. You slip into the humming digital nerve center of the Wichita PD's forensics lab, the low whine of server racks melding with the rhythmic click of mechanical keyboards. Monitors flicker with lines of code, network maps, and forensic timelines, each pixel a potential clue that might expose the BTK killer's hidden trail. By the late 1990s, digital forensics had emerged as a distinct field, taking root after the FBI formed its computer analysis and response team in 1984 to tackle cybercrime and electronic evidence. Tonight, you'll see how investigators shifted from traditional crime scene dusting to dissecting electrons and metadata, tracing a monster not through muddy footprints but through his own digital footprint and arrogance. It all begins with that fateful 2004 floppy disk. You hover over the forensic workstation as analysts extract embedded metadata from a simple Word document, fields listing the author as Dennis, the organization as Christ Lutheran Church, and a last saved timestamp neatly matching a Sunday evening service. But the digital rabbit hole plunges deeper. A sprawling graphic of cell tower location sprawls across a large screen, dotted with red circles marking each payphone call used to page the church office switchboard over 3 decades. Every call generated a log entry in telco archives. Investigators still question whether early analog logs were fully preserved or if crucial entries were lost when tapes were recycled, leaving tantalizing blanks in the killer's activity timeline. Next, your gaze shifts to keycard swipe logs from the church's security system, installed in 2001 to monitor volunteer movements. Each database entry registers an access badge ID, a date, and a precise time. On August 17, 2004, a keycard swipe at 7:03 p.m. perfectly aligns with the floppy disk's metadata, proving the killer lingered in that office after dark. A fringe rumor suggests he used a visitor's badge borrowed from the choir director to avoid linking his personal ID to the event, but forensic cross-checks of badge issuance records contradicted that myth, showing only one badge turned in that week, his own. Turning to library computer logs, you trace faint digital footprints left at the Wichita Public Library's terminals. Under the pseudonym William Edward, session records reveal IP address allocations later tied to Rader's home DSL line. You feel a chill imagining the killer endlessly researching binding techniques in PDF manuals, each keystroke echoing into a log file he assumed ephemeral. But every anonymous entry survived in backups. It's haunting to think that a seemingly private web search for best rope tensions whispered into a server's log could seal decades of terror. Have you ever considered that your own browser history might one day betray you? Perhaps the most astonishing find comes from forensic print spool analysis. Printers of that era embedded imperceptible microdots, tiny yellow speckles encoding device serial numbers and print timestamps, into every printed page as a counterfeiting measure that began in the 1980s. Analysts recovered these microdots on scraps of BTK letters mailed after 2004. By comparing dot patterns, they linked each fragment to a single printer model leased by city agencies, pinning down exactly which copier he used. Investigators still question whether he discerned the microdot's purpose and intentionally removed sections of text to foil analysis or simply never learned of the feature he so unwittingly exploited. In a separate corner of the lab, you watch as examiners extract EXIF metadata from digital photographs found hidden in Rader's home office, a series of interior shots capturing church pews, carpeting edges, and lighting fixtures. Each photo carries a timestamp, shutter speed, and even rudimentary GPS coordinates from a consumer camera's module, precise to within a few meters. Cross-referencing that timing with his handwritten daily logbook proved fatal. A photograph taken at 8:47 p.m. on a Sunday matched an oddly blank entry in his journal, confirming he had lingered long after others departed, likely surveying the scene for later use. Pause and catch your breath. What began as dusty notebooks and yellowed letters has transformed into a symphony of data, metadata fields, IP traces, keycard logs, microdots, and geotags, each thread woven together to corner a man who believed himself invisible. In this digital age, the razor that cut his anonymity was made not of steel but of binary code and tiny flecks of yellow ink. You gather around a mezzanine table as prosecutors and digital evidence specialists collaborate to assemble indelible case files. In federal courtrooms since the Daubert ruling of 1993, expert testimony on scientific methods, including digital forensics, has been rigorously vetted, a mainstream legal fact ensuring only reliable techniques endure scrutiny. Here in Wichita, every log entry, metadata report, and microdot printout is hashed, time-stamped, and accompanied by chain of custody forms, forging a seamless narrative of BTK's digital footprint. Yet a quirky rumor surfaced that Rader once attempted to corrupt his own metadata by intentionally editing file timestamps on a backup disk, hoping to mislead analysts. Forensic hash validation, however, exposed the tampered sectors as anomalies, rendering the gambit moot. Investigators still question whether other sophisticated tampering efforts might have slipped by unnoticed in his early digital experiments. As the team compiles a master timeline in the forensics database, you witness the culmination of decades of painstaking analysis. Every keystroke, call, and print job becomes a time-stamped artifact, no longer ephemeral but immortalized in secure servers. This digital mosaic illuminates patterns impossible to detect in analog days, transforming Rader's mundane habits into the noose that will finally pull him in. You sense the air shift in the lab, the anticipation, the quiet triumph, tinged with the gravity of lives lost. And as you step back from the glow of the screens, you know you are on the cusp of closure. The digital web has closed around the BTK Killer, and the final act, the arrest, awaits in the wings. You stand in the pre-dawn hush of February 25, 2005, outside a modest ranch-style home in Park City, Kansas. Frost clings to the grass as you and your team steel yourselves behind unmarked SUVs. Your breath puffs in rhythmic clouds, a quiet reminder of the cold that has nothing on the chill crawling up your spine. A tacit nod ripples through the line, the moment has come to end a 30-year nightmare. Behind you, the evolution of policing echoes in every ordered move. By the mid-2000s, the FBI's combined DNA index system, CODIS, held over 2 million offender profiles, transforming genetic evidence into an unstoppable force in modern investigations. Tonight, that very power bolsters your warrant. Proof that this unassuming man has evaded justice for decades is now incontrovertible. Inside the house, you imagine Dennis Rader stirring from sleep. Perhaps the familiar creak of floorboards betrays you first, or the muffled bark of a neighbor's dog. A fringe rumor whispers that he once slept in his Boy Scout uniform beneath loose sheets, an idiosyncrasy he believed symbolized his control both day and night. Whether patchwork myth or reality, it underscores the unsettling fact that the predator you hunt wore his innocence like armor. You draw your weapon as the breach team positions at the front window. The green contractor sticker on the glass flashes under the street lamp's glow, a detail you file away. Investigators still question whether overlooking such mundane markers in earlier searches cost precious time, allowing BTK to slip further into the shadows. Now, you cannot afford a single misstep. At the team leader's soft command, "Go," you crash through the door. Wood splinters at your feet, and the acrid scent of fresh lumber dust mingles with stale Sunday morning coffee. You flood the living room with a halo of flashlight beams. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo, is frozen in time. The hush snaps into chaos as officers fan out, voices low but urgent, "Show me your hands." You pause at the threshold of Rader's study, where decades of secrets lie. His desk displays a neat stack of sermon notes, a Bible open to Psalm 37, and a typed letter to the police, the final taunt sealed with a floppy disk. Your heart hammers as you recognize the paper, the same parish stationery that once carried his lies. A silent breath, and you step forward into history. A succinct summary: in one fluid motion, the man who bound and tormented 10 souls sits cuffed on his own floor, his facade finally shattered. You feel the weight of every unsolved case lift, even as the gravity of his crime settles more heavily than ever. Rader exhales slowly, his expression unreadable. You mirror his sigh in your chest, relief intertwined with lingering dread. A quirky account later emerged. When asked if he understood his rights, he reportedly replied in calm, clipped tones, "I have read the statutes," as if reciting legal clauses instead of Miranda warnings. It was almost surreal, this echo of the rule-bound bureaucrat you once saw in courthouse corridors. In the adjacent room, your partner collects evidence, fibers from an old rope coiled in a corner, a set of keys inscribed BTK, a chilling personal signature, though its provenance remains debated. Investigators still question whether those keys were used to lock victims' wrists or simply a failed diversion planted to taunt searchers. Either way, they become silent witness to a twisted mind that conflated ritual with reality. You observe Rader's calm demeanor as you read him his rights again, meticulously ensuring each clause is delivered. The mundane ritual of law, name, offense, custody, feels jarringly ordinary against the backdrop of atrocities he committed. You wonder, can the cadence of legal procedure truly contain the scope of his terror? Officers guide him outside into the muted glow of patrol lights. The flashing reds and blues dance off the bare trees, coloring his pallid face. You note the way his hands rest limply on the cruiser's hood, wrists still unmarked by cuffs. In that frozen tableau, predator and prey merge into a single fleeting image of humanity's darkest potential. Pause and breathe. The man you've hunted for years stands in handcuffs, surrounded by the world he once terrorized, but he is no longer invisible. Nearby, a forensic technician snaps photographs of his arrest, digital files stamped with date and time, destined for the same secure servers that cataloged his metadata. The irony of technology bringing him down is not lost on you. This arrest will join the annals of high-profile digital age takedowns, a mainstream milestone in criminal justice's embrace of electronic evidence. As you collect Rader's belongings, his ID badge, a stack of cassette sermons, a Nazi-era army manual he'd once borrowed for obscure research, you realize the breadth of his deception. He existed as two men, the smiling family man volunteering at church bazaars, and the sadist whose bindings whispered fear into the night. This duality would become the focus of courtroom scrutiny. You and the team load him into the cruiser. His eyes meet yours through the rear window, expression placid. Do you see remorse, indifference, or a cruel spark? That question lingers unsettled as you close the door. With Rader in custody, you turn to the gathered officers, cameras, and reporters. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. The city exhales a collective sigh of release, tempered by the realization that decades of unanswered prayers have finally found an end. Now, as evidence bags seal rope fragments and letters, you prepare for the next phase, courtroom confessions and motives laid bare under oath. But for a moment, you stand in stillness, letting the weight of this arrest anchor itself in your memory, the culmination of relentless pursuit, the triumph of science and perseverance, and the fragile dawn of justice finally served. You slide into the back row of the polished oak courtroom, the scent of varnish and stale coffee wrapping around you like a familiar shroud. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, and the soft rustle of legal pads and whispered exchanges creates a hypnotic backdrop. Today, Dennis Rader stands to confess in open court, his once hidden voice ready to echo through the halls of justice. As the judge calls the session to order, you feel the collective intake of breath. This is the moment every survivor, every investigator, and every family member has been waiting for since those first bindings decades ago. The bailiff's gavel strikes, and Rader rises, his posture rigid yet eerily relaxed. His crisp suit hangs on him like armor, masking a mind steeped in darkness. You notice the slight tremor in his gloved hand as he grips the lectern. A mainstream historical fact, by the early 2000s, courtroom procedures routinely included pre-trial competency hearings to ensure defendants understood their rights, but here, Rader waived those in favor of a swift guilty plea, an almost unprecedented move in a case of this scale. The prosecutor's voice lilts through the microphone, summarizing 10 counts of first-degree murder, each described in chilling detail yet delivered with clinical detachment. When the time comes for his statement, you lean forward, ears pricked. "I am the BTK Killer," he begins, voice soft yet unwavering. "I bound them because I wanted control. I tortured them to feel alive. I killed to prove I existed." Each word lands like a scalpel slice. He recounts childhood fantasies of dominance, claiming he practiced on mannequins and even tied his own hands to test endurance. A fringe tidbit later circulated. Rader reportedly told the court he once rehearsed strangulation techniques on a scarecrow in his backyard, believing its straw-filled form would mimic human resistance. Whether that anecdote is true or embellished, it underscores the obsessive precision behind his deeds. You swallow and tap your pen against the legal pad as he describes his first murders with unsettling calm. He cites the Otero killings in Park City, the stalking of Shirley Vian, the return in 1991. It unfolds like a twisted life story. Investigators still question whether his courtroom recollections stemmed from genuine remorse or were calculated performances designed to sustain his notoriety. That uncertainty pervades the room, mixing with the hum of air conditioning and the distant echo of cameras snapping in the gallery. A summary pause, he confesses to 10 murders, details his methodical planning, and frames each act as a quest for ultimate power. The cold precision of his narrative sends a shiver through you, even as the judge's stern gaze slices through the tension. As Rader continues, experts take the stand. A forensic psychologist trained in criminal profiling from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit steps forward, recall that the BAU was officially formed in 1972 to decode the minds of serial offenders, a foundational shift in investigative strategy. He outlines Rader's diagnoses: sadistic personality disorder intertwined with a compartmentalized double life. His slides show excerpts from Rader's church council reports and Boy Scout leader evaluations, documents praising his community service, now starkly contrasted with his own testimony. You blink at the cognitive dissonance. The same man who baked cookies for bake sales engineered horrific rituals in shadowed homes. Rader's motive, he explains, derived from a need to dehumanize, allowing him to dissociate victims into objects for control. You crumple and smooth a crease in your program as the psychologist quotes passages from Rader's own letters, highlighting his fascination with medieval torture and stage magic, both historical practices of spectacle and power. You almost hear the clinking of chains in a distant dungeon, the same yearning for spectacle that first drove him to taunt police with letters decades ago. Another summary pause, experts link his punishment of victims to psychological gratification, painting a portrait of a man who weaponized routine and ritual into a perverse art form. The courtroom sits in near silence as each revelation lands. Next comes victim impact testimony. Family members read statements tinged with grief that echoes through the cavernous room. You feel tears pricking your own eyes as a daughter describes discovering her mother's binding knots in grainy crime scene photos. The contrast between Rader's detached confession and the raw emotion of his victims' families is stark, like two sides of a broken mirror. You shift in your seat, the hum of the lights suddenly too loud. Then, in a defiant flourish, Rader offers one final explanation: "I wanted to feel God's presence in power. I thought dominance mirrored divine authority." A fringe rumor swirled later that he whispered this line while softly tapping a Bible on the lectern, an act both blasphemous and revealing. Whether he truly believed it or merely flirted with theological justification remains debated in criminal circles. Investigators still question whether his invocation of faith was sincere or a final manipulation to bewilder victims' families and investigators alike. That question hangs in the air, laden with complexity. You shift your gaze to the defense attorney, who, rather than argue insanity, focuses on sentencing guidelines, ensuring Rader understands the life without parole terms he faces. No appeals for mercy, no pleas of diminished capacity, only an acceptance of responsibility that seems almost too neat. In many high-profile cases, defendants exploit appeals to delay verdicts, but Rader's swift guilty plea accelerated proceedings, leaving little room for drawn-out legal wrangling. You catch yourself pondering, was this final act of compliance another assertion of control? A rhetorical question stirs: have you ever wondered if confession can be as much an act of power as the crimes themselves? As the judge pronounces the sentence, 10 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, the courtroom exhales. The gavel falls, and the echo ripples like a final heartbeat. You feel the weight of that sound settle in your chest, a reminder that while justice has been served, the scars remain. In the hush that follows, you rise with the gallery. Cameras flash, not to immortalize Rader's image, but to document the closure of a dark chapter. You step into the corridor, the air cooler here, tinged with antiseptic and resolve. Every echo of your footsteps feels like a step away from terror and toward healing. Yet in your mind, the question persists: can words spoken in a courtroom truly unbind the knots of fear woven into the community's psyche? As you exit into the bright sunlight, you carry both hope and doubt, hope that these confessions bring solace, doubt that they can ever erase the echoes of screams long silenced. You drift through the humming vault of decommissioned case files, fingertips brushing the yellowed folders stamped BTK. The air smells of aged paper and antiseptic, a quiet testament to decades of unanswered questions. As you settle into a creaking metal chair, you realize the true legacy of BTK stretches far beyond rope and taunts. It is woven into every modern approach to hunting predators who hide in plain sight. By the mid-2010s, criminal profiling courses at universities nationwide routinely examined BTK's file as a benchmark in behavioral analysis, underscoring its enduring influence on investigative pedagogy. In this hush, you weigh the unresolved mysteries that still linger. Investigators still question whether Rader ever experimented on live animals to refine his knots, a fringe tidbit that surfaced in unofficial journals claiming small mammals were found bound and released on church grounds. No records confirm these rumors, yet the whispers persist, reminding you that some secret slipped through even the tightest forensic nets. Likewise, debates endure over the full extent of his victim list. Could there be disappearances in neighboring counties, unsolved homicides that bear his twisted signature but never drew a BTK letter? That possibility casts a shadow as tangible as any rope coil. Pause and breathe. You sense the duality of his legacy, scientific triumph and human sorrow entwined. On one hand, the case galvanized the Kansas Bureau of Investigation to formalize cold case protocols in 2007, ensuring every freezing file received periodic DNA re-examination, a mainstream historical fact that transformed countless investigations. On the other, it fueled a surge in amateur sleuthing, internet forums crowded with self-styled detectives mapping potential BTK crimes across state lines, trading geospatial grids beneath glowing screen light. You've watched the hobbyist's zeal ripple from hopeful to obsessive, sometimes muddying official inquiries with conjecture as tangled as the knots he tied. Do you feel the tension between progress and passion? The same public fascination that drove advances in forensic labs also unleashed a torrent of speculation, blurring lines between fact and fantasy. Yet from that very tension emerged stronger partnerships. Law enforcement now collaborates explicitly with victim advocacy groups and community volunteers, ensuring both scientific rigor and compassionate support for families left behind. You lift a photograph of Rader in church garb, horns of light filtering through stained glass behind him. His smiling face feels impossibly distant from the horrors catalogued under his name. What motivated a suburban dad to conceal such brutality? Investigators still question whether a deep-seated need for divine authority drove him, or if his faith was merely camouflage for a darker obsession with ritual. That question lingers in the corridors of criminal psychology, fueling dissertations and peer-reviewed articles even now. A brief summary pause: BTK reshaped profiling, cold case protocols, and community engagement, yet his inner motive remains a riddle. You lean back as the vault's lights flicker overhead. The walls seem to whisper names that might never be spoken, potential victims whose stories remain untold. Against the sterile files, you sense the unbreakable link between memory and justice. Every knot documented, every letter preserved, forms a bridge between past horror and future vigilance. Today, the BTK case stands as both cautionary tale and catalyst. It taught that the most ordinary-seeming person can harbor extraordinary evil, prompting agencies to value subtle behavioral indicators alongside hard evidence. It underscored that digital breadcrumbs, once invisible, can unravel decades-old crimes. And it reminded you that closure is rarely absolute. Even after the gavel falls, the community's psyche carries scars that fade only with collective remembrance. You rise from the chair, folder in hand, and step toward the vault door. The corridor beyond gleams with pinpricks of light reflecting off glass cases of decommissioned badges and retired evidence bags. The echo of your footsteps is a metronome of progress, each step forward a vow that those long silenced will not be forgotten. As you close the heavy door behind you, you cast one last glance at the BTK folders, now locked away but never truly buried. Their legacy endures in every forensic lab, every training classroom, and every conversation about the fine line between normalcy and nightmare. The final question hangs in the quiet corridor. In a world forever changed by BTK's reign of terror, how will you ensure that vigilance outlasts fear? You fold the last folder gently, as if tucking away a troubled child. The vault's lights soften, and you inhale the subtle calm of closure's promise. Outside, the world continues its rhythm, distant traffic hums, birds flutter across evening skies, and lights switch on in quiet homes. Though the shadows of BTK's deeds linger, they no longer dictate the heartbeat of the city. In this soft aftermath, recall that justice moved forward step by meticulous step, through letters and metadata, through fiber analysis and courtroom confessions. Remember that every technique honed against the BTK killer now guards countless lives, and each lesson learned has fortified tomorrow's defenses. Breathe out the tension of fear and breathe in a gentle hope. Picture doors once locked against terror opening to light and laughter. Think of families who found solace in his arrest, survivors who breathe easier in the knowledge that his bindings hold only memories, not futures. Let your mind drift to simpler comforts, the feel of a warm blanket, the hush of a lulling fan, the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Hold on to the resilience found in community vigils, in shared stories whispered at memorials, in the quiet solidarity of those who refuse to forget. Tonight, release the weight of every unanswered question. Slowly let your senses soften, feel the smooth curve of a favorite mug in your hand, the gentle creak of a rocking chair, the distant murmur of midnight city life. Allow each exhale to carry away the final echoes of dread. Sleep knowing that the darkness once carved by BTK has been met with unyielding light, and that vigilance and compassion walk hand in hand into tomorrow. Sweet dreams.